Are we there? Okay. I wanted to show you one tool. Like, I don't talk about tooling much, but when you're giving a presentation that uses Google Slides, there's a caption button. And when you do the caption button, Google will transcribe everything I say. So I tend to talk kind of fast sometimes. You'll be able to read it on the screen. It'll get it about 90% accurate. And if you take away nothing else from today's talk, just when you hit full screen in Google Slides, hit the caption button, and your audience will thank you for it later, especially for those who are hearing impaired and have trouble following or have issues with foreign accents. I actually tested this out while Boris and Christoph were speaking, and it got 85 to 90% of what they were saying correct. So, like I said, keynote over. All right, good. So anyway, I wanted to talk today about a few buzzwords, and I'm going to apologize in advance because I hate buzzwords. So then I unload a whole bunch of them on you. I apologize. Kyoto Protocol, I have no idea what that meant. All right, so my name is Marcus Merrell. I am the Director of Technical Services for Sauce Labs. Have you all heard of Sauce Labs? This is not a product pitch by any means, but you will see our branding everywhere because I happen to think it's actually adorable. So we'll do that. So I'm co-chair of the Selenium Conference Organizing Committee, so I know what Boris and all these folks go through. I empathize whenever I see the little fuck-ups. I'm so glad, by the way, you broke the seal on cursing. I can swear all I want. That's great. Fantastic. I'm also a Selenium contributor. That's new this year. I've been using Selenium since the day it debuted in 2007, but I never wrote a line of code for it until around April of this year when I decided I was going to give up piano and video games to write some code for Selenium and started doing that. So if you are using the Selenium grid in the future and you notice that your nodes are doing a particularly nice and handsome job of prioritizing which job goes to which node, you're welcome. That's mine. So I've been in QA for 19 years. I wanted to say 20, but I can't lie. And I have a question for everyone here. I don't like necessarily the kinds of presentations where somebody's asking for a show of hands every 5 minutes, so I'll just do it a couple of times. But who here has nailed their test automation effort to the point where they trust their builds, they're releasing software consistently with confidence, and management trusts them fully? Who has nailed it? Okay, that is about 7 people. One of the first things that happened when I got to Sauce Labs was I was pulled into a meeting with the CEO, the head of product, and a whole bunch of people, my team, technical services team, 8 of the highest pedigreed testers in the world for Selenium testing, automation, stuff like that. And they said they wanted to know from my team, what are the top trends that we see? And I'm asked that question all the time. When I asked you the question, who here is nailing it, and only 7 people raised their hand, the trend I see is that nobody is nailing it. This is hard. This is difficult. We in the industry and leadership haven't made it easier, even in the 12 to 20 years that we've all been doing this. That's a trend. AI, sure, we're talking about it. It's a trend that we want to be true. And I'm not really sure it's going to help us much anytime, any soon. The trend is that this still kind of sucks. Even though we love doing it, we're persistent, we're getting incrementally better at it. And so what I'm going to do now is try to take a lot of what Boris showed to us, which I think was fantastic, and I'm going to try to layer on some cultural stuff and see if we can start talking about what the hell shift right means. I'm already sick of that term, by the way. I wanted to have a little slide up here with a gravestone where we in this session, we murder the buzzword shift right and we come up with a new one, but I'm not sure, there's too many people designed by committee, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get it. So I'm on Twitter. I don't do much on Twitter. Mostly what I do on Twitter is try to promote women in tech, women in speaking roles, because I think there's not enough of it. And so mostly if you follow me, look at who I follow and try to follow those folks as well, because we're always trying to put women on stage more at Selenium Conference, stuff like that. So that's mostly what I do in social media. I don't do much with tech or testing or anything like that. Otherwise, I'm into family. I love music, and I make robots with Jason Huggins, the inventor of Selenium. That's me at the piano at a Chopin competition in Houston, Texas, about 8 years ago. I'm sort of obsessed with Frédéric Chopin, so if you get in a conversation with me, you know, when I heard I was going to Warsaw, I'm like, it's the city of Chopin. Well, it seems like maybe not as much. I thought I was going to walk around and he was going to be everywhere, but not quite. So I talk about him more than probably anyone from around here, but anyway. And here's me. I'm the old guy on the left. The band is always like, why did they bring their dad? But I also play bass, and that's our lead singer, Katie, flipping off the crowd because we were playing a Rage Against the Machine song, and then she stage dove. It was amazing. So anyway, that's me. So like I said, I'm not going to do a whole lot with the sauce branding. I just happen to think this guy's adorable. This is our sauce bot. We've unleashed him this year. We've themed him in all sorts of different ways. There's the Portland one right there. I think that's the Portland sauce bot. All right. Well, here's what we did. Polish sauce bot. This is Husarz on the left, the mermaid on the right, and then one that they created just for me for this conference, the Chopin sauce bot. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. They created this for you, for me, for you. All right? Anyway, enough pandering. Let's get to it. What we're talking about today is, this just horrible litany of buzzwords. Shift left. Who's involved in a shift left effort in your work? Is this something you've just heard about, or is it something that we're actually doing? All right, we're not even doing it. So it looks like I'm going to have to define that a little bit. That's fine. Shift right, we're going to talk about the feedback loop. We're going to talk about observability. Now, that could be a whole workshop, and I only get about 6 minutes to talk about it in this keynote, but we will touch on it because mostly I'm going to give you some Google terms to search. Observability to me probably should have been the title of this whole thing, because to me observability is the culture shift we need in order to achieve what I am hoping to propose today. And then user behavior. Lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about risk. So, what is shift right? Does anyone get this joke? Oh, nobody gets this joke. This is a bit shift. It's a multiplication operation that you can perform at a byte level inside computer science. I apologize. I thought people would get that joke. All right, so what is it that's shifting to the right or to the left? And to the right or left of what is shifting? And then what is our ultimate goal? In the traditional model, we see a whole bunch of effort that ramps up. And then there's this right here. This is the testing bottleneck. Looks like a camel hump, right? You're working, and then everything grinds to a halt because QA has to run their damn tests. Now that's traditional. That's what's been going on since the beginning of my career. It still happens in a lot of places. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. I know it's happening in some places here. Shift left is an attempt to move that to the left. Move that bottleneck to the left. Move the effort of testing earlier into the process so that you gain efficiencies and you can ship with more confidence, right? Hopefully you all have seen this before. You've been exposed to it a little bit. What I'm going to propose today is a little bit aspirational, but I think we ought to be heading towards this. What is this? This is even. This is predictable. What I really want is for everything to be so boring that there's no mystery to it. There's no drama, there's no he said, she said, there's no yelling about your test failed or you didn't catch this bug, that kind of thing. I want a feedback loop that is so tight that our jobs all become boring for the right reasons, not for the wrong reasons, right? So we know what users are trying to do with our software. We know what we think they're supposed to be doing with our software. We study their behavior. We Look at this. When you're given a feature and you're supposed to test the feature, you sit there and you sort of synthetically come up with an idea of how the user is supposed to work with it. You may, if you're very lucky, work in a company that does focus groups and workshops to find out exactly what their users are talking about. Boris touched on this. You do the eye tracking, you ask questions, you take samples. Someone has studied that. What I don't know is who here, once again, won't ask for a show of hands, who here is actually involved with the process of gathering that feedback and putting it into their test specs? Because my bet is it's not very many folks. It's not it's a totally separate part of the development lifecycle, because those folks go to the product people. The product people go to the engineers go to the testers. And after the testers sign off, it disappears, and then that starts again. That is not a loop. That is something that has a beginning where the input is disconnected from the testers, and then when the testers sign off, all they're doing is waiting for the next feature to come. As a result, we do things by instinct and by gut feel. And we sort of feel our way through here. We don't really know what's happening. We try to define the risks, we try to define the behavior, but we're still in a vacuum until the software is actually released. And we suddenly hear there's a problem. You missed something. You failed to catch a bug. I always want to tell people when they say you failed to catch a bug, and it's like, well, I have caught every single bug that I have personally been responsible for introducing into this software, which is 0. No QA person introduces bugs. By the way, I'm saying QA a lot. It's sort of a shorthand for people in the testing profession. So I apologize if it doesn't land, if you're not actually a QA by title. So I don't know if you've seen this quote before. Without requirements or design, programming is the art of adding bugs to an empty text file. So let's go through the journey that we've seen, that I've been in for most of my career. Planning happens. Testing professionals, QA folks, sometimes are involved in planning, more so than they used to be, still not as much as they should be. Then coding happens, then testing happens. Suddenly you get a feature and you say, oh, I'm glad this thing was spec'd out. Let me read the specs that were modeled 6 weeks ago and coded 3 weeks ago, and now I get to read the spec and find out how this thing is supposed to work. My input is that probably of an engineer. Maybe someone from product is telling me how this should work. Then it goes to UAT, someone with a little bit more of a user perspective. Sometimes product does this. Then we release it, then we monitor it, which is done by a whole separate group of people. Then we maintain it. Maintenance comes at the cost of sapping coding and testing effort from the next features that are being developed, right? Shift left is an attempt to pull the testing bottleneck earlier into the cycle. So developers now do testing. Congratulations, developers. You went to school to learn computer science, to learn how to add features to software. Now you get to write tests. And you were already writing unit tests, right? What we're saying now is, in my case at least, at my e-commerce company, you're now writing Selenium tests, which nobody wanted to do. 0 people wanted to do that. But we did it anyway. We shifted left. And then it actually sort of worked for us. We were able to move the testing effort earlier in the cycle, and we were able to pull that resource. We were able to gain a little bit more confidence in our releases. And then someone started talking about shift right, and of course I went, what the hell? You're probably all going, what the hell? And what shift right was defined as was performance testing, security testing, post-release, and a little bit of smoke testing in production in order to make sure that we have this thing right. And it's essentially it's adding testing process to the end so that you can maybe take the pressure off of some at the beginning. It sort of evens out the pressure a little bit. What I really want is to somehow carry the insights we gain from production into feedback into the requirements gathering phase of the product team. What I'm calling this is wisdom. I want to use analytics to gain insight into how the software should be defined in the future. And I want to shift further to the right. I want to shift so far to the right that I'm actually using user analytics as an input directly into the cycle of planning. And this is the piece that I think is missing right now. I'm going to do another show of hands. Who here is involved in analytics testing of your software? Usually I get, about 2%. What has become one of the most important pieces of my career, the thing that I'm hoping to leave behind at the end of my career at Sauce Labs or wherever is that the analytics that your software is emitting, if you're a publicly facing website, any kind, even an internal facing website. By the way, even if you're making a toilet seat that's connected to the internet, the reason it's connected to the internet is that it's sending off analytics. How many times did they push that button before they got up? That's all they care about. They're trying to figure out actual usage. Analytics tell you the story of what your users are experiencing on their website. Now, I have a whole webinar on this. I'll give a link at the end. But the truth is, analytics are software like any other. They are coded up as software like any other feature. They are brittle and buggy just like any other feature, and nobody here effectively is even looking at it. They're not even developed as part of the normal life cycle of software. They're developed kind of in this shadow way, usually by the interns in my experience, the newest developers on the team, and yet they're the most important thing going on in your business because they tell the CEO how many people bought something today. If you want the CEO to learn your name, start reporting bugs in analytics. Now, I can tell a brief story about this. At Retail Me Not is a US-based voucher code site, coupons, right? So we give discounts on retailers, stuff like that. So if you go to Macy's or trying to think Zlata, I don't know, one of the major retailers, and you find out deals and you try to get the best price on something. So when you click on something at Retail Me Not, what happens is we have a simple HTTP request that goes off into a server, somewhere in the sky. I don't know where it is. And it tells you how far down the page was this person when they clicked? How long were they on the page before they clicked? Did they scroll down before scrolling back up and then clicking again? Where was this coupon on the page? Where was this coupon relative to other coupons from the same vendor? All these things are gathered in a single key value pair HTTP request that's sent to a server in asynchronous mode so that it doesn't affect the page performance at all. You can look at the network tab in Chrome. You can see these things firing off all the time, every time you click. And like I said, these things are calculated real time based on what you're doing, which should be terrifying. Because one day we were going to go to a party. There was a party at 8:00 p.m. It was a karaoke party, and I was going to go and I was going to win that damn thing. And what happened instead was we got a call from someone in business intelligence around noon who said, "We just lost $100,000 this morning because something's wrong. Something is wrong, yet everything looks right. All the test cases are passing. So, Marcus, did you test the analytics?" And I said, "Did you test the what?" What happened was we had the, the header rule, HR breaks in HTML between sections. 3 coupons here, break, advertisement. 3 coupons here, break, advertisement. And what happened was the thing that is in charge of recording where the coupon was when you clicked it, this is number 4 on the page, it's number 7 on the page, that was getting reset to 0 every time you hit the HR break. 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, instead of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have an automatic algorithm that reorders the coupons on the page constantly. And if you click coupon number 0, it's going to say, it was at the top, so we can rank that up. It actually measures that kind of thing and sends signals and re-ranks all of the coupons dynamically. And suddenly, all of the ones at the bottom of the page that were being clicked on were being promoted to the top of the page, and they were low-value items. Nobody cared about them. So people stopped clicking on anything because they didn't see the good stuff. It was all buried at the bottom because the analytics were wrong. We lost $100,000 in about 4 hours because nobody tested the analytics. Nobody in QA knew what the hell they were. And yet, there's an ocean of data sitting in some server somewhere telling us every single thing that the user is doing on the page at any one time. But what are we monitoring? We're monitoring CPU. We're monitoring network. We're monitoring how many users are on the page. We're not monitoring how many of them are able to convert. And we're not even testing to see if these things are calculated right. There's a whole world of software happening that this entire industry barely knows about. And this is not, believe me, not just true in Poland. Every conference I go to, every time I talk about this, 5 hands go up out of 400. We're missing the boat here. And so to me, when I say shift right, first I say, let's come up with a better name for it, because that's stupid. Secondly, I say, let's dive into the world of analytics and the world of user behaviors, and let's make sure that we, the testers, we who have the whole perspective on what the user should be doing and how we should be measuring the effectiveness of a given feature, how is that feeding back into product requirements? How are we testing this stuff to make sure that the stuff that the CEO cares about is actually working on a daily basis? Now, I agree completely with Boris's assertion that testing is not automation, automation is not testing. What I'm proposing is, I think Richard Bradshaw would call it checking. Building a set of fairly simple tests that would check to make sure that the situation is exactly where you left it. Now, you can't do this with exploratory testing, but you can build it after the fact. Exploratory testing is what Ingo's going to talk about. Where is Ingo? Anyway, I'm looking forward to that. So, what I am proposing is that we close the loop and that we use analytics, we test analytics when they are created, not 6 months after when something breaks. Test them when they're created, learn how to monitor them, learn how to gain insight into them, learn how to feed them back. So, we use real-world behavior, which is available before the requirements are gathered. We understand the model of the traffic that's being generated. We have more trust and confidence in the requirements then. Then we add tests to the suite based on this. We release, and using feature flags and quick rollback and new user traffic models, all that stuff, we have confidence. And then we monitor traffic based on a model that we have, not just of CPU and network, but of user behavior patterns. So what I want to do is use this data, which is driven by actual user signals, not just gut instinct, not just guessing, to generate and validate requirements that product uses to feed engineering. It's a loop. Let's go through this thought exercise. I'll try to keep this brief. I have no idea how I'm doing on time. So this is a screenshot of a fairly basic, fairly standard monitor. And I want you to have a look at this chart. Mostly pay attention to the middle area where it's this thing. In fact, I'll zoom in on it. Right now, this is measuring things. This is a baseline comparison. Yesterday, the CPU did this at a certain time. So the blue area was here, and now the green area is here. We made some improvement. But to me, this is like a blood pressure monitor where I now know that the patient is alive and probably healthy, but I want to know what they're thinking. The thing is that using user analytics, you know what the users are thinking and doing. Using user analytics, you would know without eye tracking, without video, exactly what the user on the toilet is doing. You wouldn't have to wonder, you wouldn't have to witness any unpleasantness. So what if this blue was yesterday, before we made a release, and each point of data represented a user creating an account, or a user, trying to think of a good example. I mean, we could just use the simple example. A user has now bought something on your site. That's the blue. And then we made a release, and the green says people aren't buying anymore. People are only half. What was the change that we made, or what happened in that change that changed so it made the user traffic drop? Something happened functionally that changed what users are doing on the site from yesterday to today. Right now we ask these questions in a very clinical way. So this would be on the order of diagnosing more of the, the mental health of an app as opposed to the physical health of the app. That's what I'm trying to get at. That's what we've built at my previous company when we told us to the dollar how much money we made off of every single browser OS combination that we had. So Chrome 64, we made $1,000. Chrome 65, we made $1,100. And then we would do that in a trailing 30-day period, so that when we made a release, we could say, well, yesterday, Chrome 64 dropped, but the other Chrome browser stayed the same. So we made a change that broke something in Chrome 64, but everything in Chrome 63 and 65 is fine. But since we are tracking the actual user behaviors in the analytics, we know where the problem occurred, we know where it was isolated to. And so I want to send you home with some homework. Keynotes are not usually about action, they're usually about aspiration, and I'm supposed to pound the podium at some point, I hear. I'm supposed to so we'll see that. But I want to send you home with a thought exercise, and this is real simple, heading in the direction of what I'm trying to get at. I want a cross-functional retrospective, not just cross-engineering. Mostly when you do a retrospective, you pull the engineers, you pull the testers, you pull the product, and you all argue with each other. What I want is, I want to pull business intelligence in and say, how did the analytics change? I want to pull in customer success and say, are customers reporting anything differently? Or, oh, by the way, we made a release yesterday, I don't know if you noticed, because they usually don't get that stuff communicated to them, in my experience. I want to pull marketing in, if it's a big enough feature. I don't want to do this for every retrospective. I also think executive presence is nice for retrospectives if it's a particularly big one. Keep it brief, keep it action-oriented, but make it cross-functional across the whole function. I want to know, how did the behaviors change after the release? How can we feed that back into the requirements planning for the next cycle? I want to identify opportunities and risks based on these inputs. And I will, since I'm getting the 10-minute flag, I'm going to keep this story very brief, but I once had a retrospective where we pulled in people after we made an enormous change to all of the microservices in our whole ecosystem, where we went from a single cookie token authentication scheme to a JWT, a JSON Web Token, because we were no longer just collecting email addresses, we were now collecting credit card information. And since we had successfully migrated from monolith to microservices, it would have been real easy to make this change with a monolith. In the 13 microservices that we had to make changes in every single one of them. And when we hit the release button, boy, were we nervous. So our retrospective included everyone. And out of that retrospective came the definition of a new role, which was that of the release engineer. If we hadn't had an exec in the room, that conversation never would have gone anywhere. But after that, we created the role of the release engineer, mainly to look after this kind of thing. So let's talk about observability. Once again, this is a topic for an entire day or entire year's worth. It's a career at this point. Mostly what I want to do is explain, this is how we get to the point where we can look at the analytics in the right way. And mostly what I think I'm doing is giving you some Google terms to search for, right? So instrumentation. How do you instrument the software so that you can observe it? How do you make it resilient How do you give it failover strategies that allow you to quickly bounce back from a failure? Is it that you know when this particular thing goes wrong, you hit the reset button on the machine, and that usually solves the problem? Is that resilient? Or do you actually diagnose the root cause and find out what is going on inside the software? It's trying to tell you stuff. Are you able to see that? Team culture is another point of observability. Without the right team culture, you can't build it. Release and rollback confidence is another thing that I think is transformational to a business. If you can understand how to have confidence in your release and also how to be able to say, that didn't work, roll it back, using feature flags. See, if you're not using feature flags already, the sales pitch around feature flags is you can do A/B testing. You can dabble in the market and find out whether or not something gives you lift or gives you extra benefits. The true benefit to everyone in this room for feature flags is that by coding a feature flag, you have already coded yourself an escape hatch. You can roll it back with no trouble. Most of the time, unless there's a database column or something like that. You can turn it off and you've created your rollback strategy. Normally, rollbacks involve a whole deployment process. Run a bunch of scripts, do whatever you need to. But if you have a feature flag, turn it off. It's magical what that will do to the confidence of an organization releasing software regularly. Observability gets you predictability, gives you the ability to know what could happen. Managed tech debt gives you the ability to understand user behaviors better. Your software is trying to tell you stuff. All we need to do is code the signals in and tell them where to go. Silos can kill this kind of thing. It's interesting that in our industry-wide adoption of the tribe, guild, squad model, we sometimes have to remain in the silos, but the truth is that can kill the whole observability, the whole motion we're talking about here. So, it's funny, I was talking to Aslak Helsoy, who is the inventor of Cucumber, and I was being slightly critical of the tool. Once again, a whole hour-long topic I could get into. And he said sometimes he wishes that instead of inventing Cucumber, he had just told people to communicate better. And that really is the undertone of everything we're trying to say here. Communication. I asked my boss recently, how much of your job is spent getting people to communicate with each other? And he said, 100%. That's 100% of my job. I'm like, yeah, that's okay. All right, then baseline good. This is Twitter's microservice stack. They have a whole article, I think they've written a book at this point, an ebook about observability, and it's all about infrastructure, not about culture. This is where I recommend Charity Major's work at Honeycomb on observability, because it's so much about culture, and it's so much about user behaviors, and it's so much about analytics, and it's so much about trying to get your software to tell you its story. Because all of this stuff is happening, and it's been happening for years, and we're trying to get it to speak to us now. And now we can, at scale. Monitoring is an action that you perform. It's a verb. This helps you to mitigate risk. Observability is a characteristic your system possesses. Is it observable or is it not? And when it possesses observability, your risk is lower, not just mitigated. Mitigating is after the fact. Lowering is much preferred. And let's talk about risk, since I am running out of time. I firmly believe that every single person in the QA world would benefit from learning the language of risk. When you say risk, executives hear you. When you say it was green instead of blue, nobody gives a shit. So, observability. Some exercise. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to blow through this. What I want you to do for observability when you get back to your desk on Monday is, if you're a UI Selenium tester, find out where that intersects, where the UI intersects with the API. Study that connection. Try to replace some pieces of your UI test with API. That helps you with observability. Find the Swagger spec. If you're an API tester, learn about logging and tracing. Learn about how the signals get thrown around. Learn how developers diagnose issues. For exploratory testers, what alerts get fired? What wakes your developers up in the middle of the night? This is not just observability for the software, but also for your team and culture. For risk, here's what I want you to do. The next time you report a bug, don't write the report unless you understand what the risk is of this bug making it into production. Now, I'm not saying don't write the report. I'm saying there is a risk. If you found a bug, there is a risk. I promise you 100% there is a risk. It might be minuscule, but it's there. So identify it. Instead of saying, inserting a non-printable character into this field displays an unattractive .NET stack trace to the user. How many times have we seen that, right? Try this. Inserting a non-printable character surfaces a security risk. The user sees a .NET stack trace, which will allow nefarious users to fingerprint our system and know what it's made of. If you know that a website that you're on is using .NET, then you know where to poke at it if you have zero-day vulnerabilities that you subscribe to, or something like that. You know what ports to hit, you know what commands to send, you know that maybe it's hosted on some web server that has some vulnerability that's already well known, maybe they haven't patched it yet. If somebody knows you're running .NET, that's a powerful weapon to use against you. So if you can write up bug reports with risk as a perspective, you gain power. So this is what we are trying to do in order to shift this conversation where we need it to go. We want smoke tests in production. We want functional performance security testing in production. We want to integrate with monitoring. This is not just Sauce Labs. This is we, like the collective we. We want to test analytics that they're emitted properly from your website. We also want to admit that they arrive properly at the business intelligence end of it. You're in charge of making sure it got sent. Somebody else is in charge of making sure it got received. Nobody is testing the middle part where it actually gets carried from one place to the other. Eventually, we want to use analytics to inform requirements, but eventually, we want to use the analytics to actually generate the test cases. Now, this definitely gets into the field of AI and ML, but this isn't nebulous. This is a very, very definable goal. Using user behaviors that the software knows how to generate, that you understand fully, you already have your test cases because you know what your users are doing. Now, this is mostly for regressions. It's not for new features, but it gives you insights into new features. And then the thing that we're working on at Sauce Labs is trying to give people real insights into the tests they have. Sauce Labs, we know exactly what people are doing when they test. We have the full stack. We're trying to give them the ability to cluster functionality, analyze, do failure analysis, and say, if you fix these 2 errors, you'll fix all of your failures, or you fix 80% of your failures. We're trying to help people look at analytics using HAR files that they generate. HAR file is HTTP archive file that they can generate to be able to analyze all of the HTTP requests being emitted from the software. This is everyone's responsibility, and we in this room have the perspective over the whole org and the entire software stack. We have a unique opportunity to do this. Only the people here. Only the testers. I feel like for years we've been looking for what's our unique ad and why are we underappreciated. This is why. We're not doing this. We're not giving the real insights. Some of us are. It needs to be a movement. The more you talk about observability, the more engineers will hear you. The more you talk about risk, the more executives will hear you. To me, the word risk is the thing that will get us elevated into the next echelon equal to the level of developers. That is my hope. Here are some references. I want to point you to the observability maturity model. It's a fine paper because it doesn't just cover infrastructure. Open tracing is interesting. We're actually building open tracing into the Selenium grid. It's funny, I work for Sauce Labs, but I'm promoting the Selenium grid. I think it's great. I used 3 different versions of Selenium grid, and all 3 times I was still a customer of Sauce, so I feel like there's no conflict. Anyway. A gentleman by the name of Anand Bagmar also works on the Selenium Organizing Committee. He does a lot of work with analytics. This link down here is my link to a webinar that I did where I talk in depth about how to test analytics at the tester level. And that is all I've got. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Apart from Chopin, do you play any blues on the piano?
I was just talking about this. I have tried at least a dozen times in my musical career to play jazz, blues. I'm actually trying to form a Fiona Apple cover band, if anyone's ever heard of Fiona Apple. But I always go back to Chopin. I always do. I understand him on a fundamental level. I don't know why it is. I think Bach puts me into a cage. Jazz is too free. I want right in the middle where it's complex, beautiful, and you can play around with tempo. My short answer. I certainly appreciate blues. In the back, you had?
One more. Can you raise your hand?
I appreciate that question.
Hi. Could you give us some, like, tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, like on Monday we'll get back to our work, like what would you recommend to do, like the one step to improve observability in our projects? So you mentioned about like Selenium testers doing this, API doing that, Exporter doing that, but like one thing, like to raise awareness.
Raise awareness and observe. So I don't know if you use a tool like Splunk or something like that to analyze logs, aggregate logs. I mean, that's one big thing to improve observability. Do all of your APIs have Swagger docs published?
They do.
They do. Wow, you're pretty advanced here. Let's see. I could probably riff on this all day. I think that culturally, are you communicating to the level that you need to be? Is one question. But also, I think the next question I would start to go on is, if your infrastructure is okay and your basic software processes are okay, what are you doing for analytics? Are you doing anything to analyze to see how they're being aggregated? Who is using those to do what? And how can you test those, check those from an automated perspective? That's something I would do, because it surfaces so many insights, and you might find bugs that have been in there for years, and you've been calculating something wrong that on a fundamental level that will really change things. I mean, there's so many things that can go wrong with analytics, and nobody tests it. So I would focus my power on that, honestly. I think that lends itself into observability, not in the traditional way people talk about it, but damn it, people need to talk about this. So that's my short answer.
John.